Welcome to Tech Talks. Our platform edition today is focused on how you can align your spend with value, an introduction to workload pricing. Tech Talks is a series of short webinars that are deep dives for technical practitioners. We value you, our customer, and want you to continue in your Splunk journey. Our experts help create these best practices, and we want you to leverage them in your daily role. Hi, I'm Judith Silverberg-Reina. I work on the product marketing team focused on the main platform, and I'm excited to share the basics of workload pricing and introduce my colleague, Jeff Myers.
Hey, and I'm Jeff Myers. I'm a director with the sales engineering team here at Splunk. I'll be the one that's talking through some of the technical details and, more importantly, the implications that this model has for you as a Splunk admin or a Splunk champion, and hopes that we can help you carry Splunk to more and more problems and help you get more and more value out of the platform you love.
Sounds great. Thanks, Jeff. Today, we're going to talk about what exactly is infrastructure workload pricing, its many benefits and how it's measured, a short demo of how our cloud monitoring console can be used to easily monitor your license usage, and go through some customer use cases to see the value of this model. Then we'll cover additional resources and next steps for your journey. This past year, we introduced a number of new pricing and adoption options that help our customers get the most out of Splunk. Our predictive programs provide more predictable costs as customers scale up solutions at higher data volumes. Our classic ingest pricing offers volume-based pricing to customers based on gigabyte per day data ingestion into Splunk products. And rapid adoption packages help them get up and running quickly with specific use cases. And of course, the focus of today, workload or infrastructure-based pricing. This pricing helps customers who want compute-based metrics that align with spend. We're lowering the bar so customers don't have to worry about what goes in based on cost and can focus on what's valuable moving forward. And now let's dive into further detail on why you're here today to learn more about the power of workload and infrastructure pricing.
Hey, so let me just take a couple of minutes here and describe the drivers for this pricing metric, and we're going to use this to set up the rest of the conversation. But there's really three key things that we're looking at from the pricing metric. I'll start with the middle one, and that is value orientation, as you heard Judith already mention. As I've gone out and worked with hundreds of Splunk clients, they always tell me one thing, which is that, or not always, but very often tell me one thing, which is that value is achieved when I get data out of Splunk, not necessarily when I put data into Splunk. So one of the main things we're trying to achieve with this type of a shift is to find a pricing metric that was more naturally aligned with the value that you get out of the system. The second item is, I'll start from the top, but the second item is customer control. So as we start to make a shift towards workload and not just data ingest, a side effect is that you as a Splunk administrator or a Splunk user or a Splunk consumer have a lot more control over what you do with that platform. So you can use natural features like workload management or user quotas and things like that to obtain customer control. And you're sort of no longer locked into that one control point of just putting the data in or leaving the data out. Right? The third item is this metric, we believe, provides a natural way to accomplish the goal of being able to sort of prioritize high priority and low priority data. You may have talked with Splunk in the past about things like high volume, low value data and things like that. We believe this is a natural proxy for a lot of those complexities that our customers see. And again, it provides a more simple way for you as a customer to sort of control those ebbs and flows as you see fit. And the last thing I want to say, and this is really the call to action for this presentation and others, is that it also presents a side effect where all of these items are magnified by you as a Splunk admin following better practices and undergoing the process of continuous optimization every time you do something better inside of Splunk, right? That'll give you, more compute capacity that you can then point at a different use case, right? So we kind of look at all of these items mixed together as being the main reasons why we view this as an advantageous metric for our clients to go carry Splunk to new use cases. So folks, I want to take a giant step back. I've been working with this model for a couple of years now with many, many, many clients, and I just want to share with you the fact that I believe to my core that while this sounds like a simple pricing metric, I have seen that when sort of fully absorbed, this represents what I would call a fundamental paradigm shift in the way that clients can approach Splunk. And I think if we are too quick with this, we look at it just as a way to change price or the way price comes at me or something along those lines. And it does this a disservice, and it does really a disservice to you as a consumer of Splunk. So if you're willing to do it, open up your mind for the rest of this session to sort of challenge the current paradigm of the way that you're operating Splunk, and then think through the principles we talk about, and let's think about whether or not this can fundamentally change the way we approach a platform that we love. So this notion of a paradigm shift is familiar to any of you that took a sophomore year philosophy class. It's borrowed from Thomas Kuhn. And this quote right here is interesting, and I think it's interesting for you as an audience. So look, the world will not be any different tomorrow versus today. But my hope is if we explain this correctly and if you absorb it fully, that you will be changed and your perspective of Splunk will be changed. So again, let's just think this through. Let's absorb this information, and let's go challenge the sort of traditional assumptions that we've had, when we go forth tomorrow and try to attack new use cases and new outcomes.
Now that you understand the powerful potential of this pricing model, let's explain it in more detail. So what exactly is workload pricing? It's a value-oriented pricing option for Splunk Cloud, Splunk Enterprise, and Premium solutions that aligns with search activity and is based on the compute required to run Splunk. It is available to both new and current customers. An important note, we often use workload pricing as a general overarching term that encompasses both workload pricing, our pricing model name for cloud customers, and infrastructure pricing, our model for on-premise and bring your own license customers. While the exact metric for each slightly differs, with workload pricing using SVCs, Splunk Virtual Compute, and infrastructure pricing using CPUs, they both align with search activity and are compute-based. Splunk workload and infrastructure-based pricing empowers you to tear down barriers to your team's adoption and bring in all data of all priorities, align your investments in hardware and software, and take full control over product expansion. I'm going to hand it over to Jeff to explain the benefits, how it's measured and monitored, and some customer use cases.
Thanks, Judith. So as we start to explain this, let's start at the foundation. Whether we're talking about cloud with SVCs or on-premise with vCPU, the point behind this metric and this model and the benefits that you can receive is the fact that any given compute unit, again being a vCPU or an SVC, think of it as a unit of potential work that can be pointed at search or ingest, and there's a relationship between the mixture of those items. You as a customer have the ability to control your search patterns and your ingest patterns, and in effect this gives you, the customer, the ability to kind of metaphorically slide this black bar that you see on the screen, more towards ingest or more towards search. Right? This is what's going to allow you to embrace variable analytic patterns, which will in turn allow you to embrace variable ingestion patterns, which will then reduce the barrier to data ingestion problems. And as I've said multiple times, it'll allow you to more accurately align the value you get from Splunk against the investment and cost that you put into it. And while that's an interesting atomic level point, everybody knows that no single Splunk instance is composed of one single usage pattern, one single data source, one single use case. And so it's important that you take that base element and start to build it up and think about what I would call the portfolio of data that you have inside of your system and the portfolio of use cases. And as you can see on the screen, what you can start to do is think about sort of putting long tail, low workload scenarios next to high workload scenarios, and mixing these types of scenarios to sort of blend together the overall cost of your Splunk system. Right? And what this is going to allow you to do is to take in many of those sort of long tail scenarios that I'll talk about later on, ones that have, to date, if I'm a betting man, have been left out in the cold for you as a Splunk consumer. So let's talk about that, and let's talk about the implication of what I just said. If you've heard our CEO, Doug Merritt, talk recently, you've heard him talk about things like dark data. You've heard Splunk talk about the need to carry real-time data analytics everywhere to inform better decision-making. If I put myself in your shoes, I think to myself, that's a challenge, because to date, I've had a struggle as a Splunk champion or as a Splunk admin, bringing in all of that data that I believe to be valuable. And, I, Jeff Myers, have worked with clients like yourselves to tackle this problem. And this picture is essentially trying to represent that. And what we've seen happen is that if you are looking at a data volume-based license, we tend to see customers constraining the amount of data that ends up in Splunk because they're constraining it to the things that their finance teams will allow them to purchase. And they get challenged with the question of, hey, look, Splunk is an expensive platform. Are you positive that there's going to be so much exceedingly awesome value coming out of every single piece of data you want to throw in there? Are you sure about that? And if you're not, then we're not going to fund it. And so what happens is that you have clients who sort of constantly track their sort of defendable data volumes, and they never really get into these, what I would call sort of shadow demands, sort of that data that's sitting right behind that absolutely defendable business case, and they never ever get the chance to really crack into those things that Doug and Tim and folks talk about, where you think about those transformative use cases that you might be able to bring to light if you have a always available investigative data lake. Right? So think of this slide as just sort of motivation, and it's the beginning of my discussion around that paradigm shift. But if we can take advantage of those principles that I just talked about with those different workloads of data, right, then we might be able to create a situation where we can expand this pink bubble, or even start, as the arrow is showing, to crack into those transformative scenarios that we've all been thinking about, right, but that have been effectively off limits to us to date. So let's take a quick look at these two licensing models and compare and contrast them. On the left, we've got Ingest, which is our traditional model based on gigabytes sent to Splunk per day. And on the right, we have infrastructure or workload, which is based upon the compute needed to run Splunk. As you know, the traditional model is based upon the volume of data that's sent to Splunk, and then let's compare that with the right-hand side, which is the infrastructure workload is really meant to be based off of the amount of work that you're doing within your Splunk environment. Beyond reading the slide, the other thing that I want to share with you here is the consequences of this. So as you've seen us talk about, we find some of our clients left in a situation where if they're on an ingest-based license, they tend to fall into a trap of having to filter out maybe data of unknown value, or they reserve Splunk only for known to be high value data. And in effect, as you saw me just talk about, they leave a bunch of data what we would call in the dark. And a wonderful consequence of the infrastructure or workload model is that since the Splunk license is aligned with the work that you're doing, that affords our users the ability to bring in those experimental data sources or those unknown value level data sources. Since there's not going to be a price tag for the volume, but rather for the analytics on them, they could bring those in, start to experiment, start to find those analytics, and then as they find value within those data sources and the resulting analytics, they have the ability to take that work and choose to put it into production or not. And really the net effect that we're striving for here is to put more control and value orientation into your hands as a customer. So now let's take a peek first in terms of how Splunk Cloud measures compute or workload needs, and then we'll take a peek at how customer managed or on-premise Splunk does the same thing. So first and foremost, in Splunk Cloud, the unit of measure that we use is what we call an SVC. It stands for a Splunk Virtual Compute Unit. And think of that Splunk Virtual Compute Unit as being analogous, though not strictly equivalent to, but analogous to a virtual CPU core running inside of the cloud that is underpinning your Splunk Cloud instance. Right? It also accounts for other factors like memory, I/O, network resources, and other factors that allow your Splunk instance to thrive. But largely, you can think about it as being analogous to that, data processing capacity underneath your Splunk Cloud instance. Right? The one thing that I would call out here is that since it is, again, pegged to workload, as the sort of final bullet on the right-hand side talks about, this is where that sort of sliding scale capacity comes from. And it gives you the ability to choose to point that unit of compute at either data ingestion or at analytics, or vary those things as you see fit, and also use advanced features to sort of protect and optimize the different workloads that you're running through your Splunk Cloud instance. But the core of the message here is that if you're talking Splunk Cloud, the unit of measure that you'll hear us talk about is an SVC. Okay, and let's compare that or contrast that with customer-managed Splunk, or what we might call on-premise Splunk. And it doesn't matter if it's running in your data center or it's a BYOL instance that you're running in somebody else's cloud. In that scenario, we're going to be talking about a category that we call infrastructure-based pricing. We'll still be talking about Splunk workloads, and the unit of measure that we'll be talking about there is a vCPU. And a vCPU basically maps to a logical core that you're using to run the business of Splunk. And I call it the business of Splunk because, as we've said, it's going to be for the search heads and indexers only. And the couple of details that I want to share here are questions that I get from folks like yourselves is, like, hey, what happens if I'm running physical? What happens if I'm running virtual? What happens if I'm running in the cloud? Right? And the key point is this. If you're running Splunk on top of physical infrastructure and you have no hyper-threading turned on, then we'll be looking at the number of physical vCPU cores that you have. If you then turn on hyper-threading, we'll be looking at the logical or virtual CPU cores, right? So typically, hyper-threading will multiply your core count times 2. So if you have, let's just say, 100 physical cores, you turn on hyper-threading, you'll then show up as having 200 vCPUs. Right? And then typically, in 99% of the cases, when you're running a BYOL instance in public cloud, or if you're running in a private cloud on top of virtualized infrastructure, in that case, you will simply be looking at the virtual CPUs. The one thing that I like to call out here is sometimes you'll hear us at Splunk call this a logical vCPU or something along those lines. Those two things are analogous. Point being, bare metal, no hyper-threading, we're talking about physical vCPUs. Hyper-threading or any of the other variants, we're talking about virtual CPUs. All right, deep breath. Finally, we come down to really what it's all about. Again, if you've hopefully kept with us this far, the point is there is a whole brand new way to look at your Splunk instance. You and your users have a brand new set of methods that you can use to control the Splunk license cost and accordingly increase the access of Splunk within your environment. And the way that you're going to do that is by effectively optimizing the compute usage for your Splunk instance. And again, this is true on-premise or in the cloud. And so what you'll do is start to impart best practices. Right? So if you have, if you're following best practices and implement better practices, what's going to happen is you're going to see that in order to conduct the exact same set of analytics, it will take less work. As soon as you can answer the same question with less work, that means that you have free capacity to use to point at solving another problem. right? So you can do that by implementing better practices. You can do that by implementing workload management features. You can do that by implementing user controls. You can do that by implementing time slicing or all of those best practices. And there are many, many of these that you'll find in other tech talks hosted by us at Splunk, and there'll be many more coming in the future. Right? But the point being, as the guardian of your Splunk investment, you'll be using the traditional admin screens that you use today, plus a few more that I'll demo in a second, to basically look at your workload and to look at how efficient you are and to hunt for areas of optimization. Because once again, the point being that if you do optimize, not only is it a good idea and something you should pat yourself on the back for implementing, but every time you introduce one of those, you effectively give yourself and your company and your stakeholders a little bit more Splunk that they can then use to point at solving a different problem. Let's get down to a little bit of a product demo. Again, in this scenario, we're really talking about management features, but I do want to give you a very quick demonstration of some of the management capabilities and reports that I want you to be looking at in order to do what I just talked about, protect your investment, get the most out of it. I'm going to jump into the cloud monitoring console and highlight the way that a cloud customer will look at their SVCs and utilization, and I'll talk to the very same things that exist inside of the monitoring console or the distributed monitoring console on premise. So let's do a very quick demo of where you can get SVC utilization if you're a cloud customer. If, just real quickly, if on the other hand you are using a customer managed instance, either BYOL or running on-premise, there will be similar but not the exact same information present within the monitoring console of your own Splunk instance. Here I'm just going to do a demo of what a cloud customer would see. So I'm in my cloud instance. As you'll see, this is a pretty small demo instance. I'm going to open up the Cloud Monitoring Console app, and I'll come to the overview page. And here there are some things that are useful for me if I'm concerned about the utilization of my system. And so I can see, for example, the highlights of search activity and things along those lines. For the moment, what I want to do is drill into the workload pricing details, and I'll get to that under the license usage workload pricing option. And when I open that, I'll be brought to my workload pricing details page. So as you can see, like I said, this is a pretty small demo environment. I'm entitled to 5 SVCs. Kind of humorously, we're over-consuming against those 5, but this is exactly where you would come to see how you're doing against your SVC entitlement. Right, there's docs that are linked into from this, and they provide some tips. Like, for example, if you start to see your utilization come up against 80% of your license entitlement, that might be a trigger for an alert so that you can make sure that there's enough room to support the performance in your environment and things along those lines. So you can get to those docs by clicking this link right here. Okay, so you can see what overall usage looks like. Then more importantly, as you kind of get into the process of being a lifeguard of those resources, you can start to see things like which users are consuming the SVCs in the environment at which rate. Right? And this would be a place where you can come and highlight very aggressive users. In this case, it's a pretty small user population, but this might be a situation where I can find that this user or admin or a different power user is possibly using tons of a high percentage of SVCs, and I can modify this search to then see if they're doing this consistently over time. Right? And then I can also look to see something very important, which is to see where my SVCs are going in terms of the kind of searches that are being executed, and that's going to be split between the broad categories of search types that we see within our Splunk instance. So this is how you see what's happening with respect to SVCs within your environment. Just one more quick cameo that I want to share with you is that as we've talked about throughout our session, SVC usage tends to be highly correlated with search activity.
So what that means is that just about anything that you're doing from a search monitoring perspective can be useful in helping to directionally control your SVC consumption. So in this case, I just went to another screen within the Cloud Monitoring Console. I went to search, and this gives us various ways to dig into our search activity, and I went to expensive searches. And this is one of the things I like to share with my customers to say that this could be the source of a worst first list, a place where you come and look at those searches within your environment that are most expensive, potentially analyzing these to see if there might be a different strategy that you might want to use for these searches, summary indexing, different scheduling procedures, more accurate search terms and things along those lines. All of those factors might come into play. Again, this is a super high level demonstration, just to show you where you can get this information. And then what we're going to do in future sessions is we'll highlight different best practices by various Splunkers, all targeted at helping effectively, helping you as a user, as an administrator, effectively control your SVC usage, right? So that you can get the most return on investment from that Splunk license.
Wow, how was that for a demo? Well, look, I hope that you find that this content interesting. I hope you find those features inspiring, just in terms of the ability to go attack the problems in a very different way. What I want to leave you with here are some of the scenarios that I've seen be extremely valuable to clients that I've worked with one-on-one. And I just want to warn you, there are many, many, many scenarios where this flexibility and this newfound paradigm that we've been talking about, it just changes the game. And I just want to highlight a few, but if you have some that you're contemplating, feel free to hit up any one of your Splunk contacts that from, an account team perspective or, within the community. Any one of us would be happy to talk about this. So real quick, just kind of 3 scenarios that I see that I might almost call patterns, right? One is the top one here that I think of, every single day. I've got clients that come to me and they say, Jeff, that workload model sounds great. The issue is, I run enterprise security and we do a lot of security monitoring, and that to me sounds like a very high workload scenario. Is there any value for me with workload? And this is one that I think of, and I call it the security enrichment scenario. Every single day these security clients, you have alarm bells that go off because there might be a perceived threat, right? Or maybe there's an issue that you're investigating. And these clients are constantly left at that point in time to go investigate the issue. And sometimes they have to get to their sort of second-level analytics or third-level analytics or even do a full investigation. And very often at those times, they then have to hop out of Splunk, right, and into other products and possibly even raw data. And the reason why they have to do this is because, again, those are those sort of longer tail data sources that never made the cut. Right? They were never deemed to be frequently high enough value data, so the customer had decided to leave these, out in the dark or just outside of a Splunk. And what I've seen is, by following good practices of data organization and omitting these long tail data sources from ES, yet bringing them into Splunk, since the search volume then tends to be low and infrequent, the cost per gigabyte for that long-tail data is minimal, right? And the benefit of that is that they get much faster, investigations. They get much richer, security analytics, just by simply bringing in that long-tail data into Splunk, the same product that they use for investigations, and eliminating that need, for the console hopping, and eliminating the problem of having to go to those historically very brittle environments that are very inflexible, to support the ad hoc, investigation or enrichment that they need. Very similarly, if you jump to the middle bullet, very similarly, I see something happen within application development scenarios. Very often, I have clients that are, using Splunk within an SRE team or through a traditional application, monitoring type of scenario, and they have custom alerts that are running inside of Splunk on top of what may be like higher level logs, if you will, right, or even system metrics. And that's a relatively manageable and small pile of data. Right? But once one of those alarm bells goes off, that they have run into an application problem, or the SRE team is seeing an issue become present in production, again, because the data volume of the supporting evidence is very voluminous and not often searched, customers have often chose to keep that outside of Splunk just because the gigabyte price tag of Splunk precluded them from being able to bring it into Splunk. So very similar to that first scenario for security, I see a lot of app dev customers bringing in their own version of that long tail data. Imagine having, the supporting debug logs sitting inside of Splunk for those moments where you're going live with a new feature, right? Often you'd be concerned about the volume. Hey, I know I'm going to blow through my license on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, every single day while we're trying to investigate how we're doing with our go live on a new feature. We have this problem of exceeding our license, right? Again, if you're using these features correctly and organizing your data correctly, and keep managing that workload and keeping that workload down, there is zero problem with bringing in that large pile of extra data into your Splunk instance, provided you're following the best practices. So this is another scenario where I see application teams, application development teams, and SRE teams reap the benefits of this new model. Right? And I apologize for talking so much, but I definitely want to share one more use case, and that is what I call the periodic use scenario. Again, one of the themes that I hear from clients is it's not only about like high value, low value data, high volume, low volume data. Jeff, what they'll say is, I often have these sort of situations of periodic use where I have sort of bursty data inflow. Think about any cyclical business, and it could be on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, where you have your sort of, peaks Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then things die down Friday, Saturday, Sunday, stuff like that, right? But often what happens is that while the data volume rides up and rides down and rides up and rides down, I see these clients that the fingerprint for them where I know it'll be valuable is if you look at the workload and you see workload remains relatively flat, right? Meaning we're running about the same number of searches, even on larger or smaller piles of data. If the search runtime or search workload itself remains flat, that's a scenario where a workload-based license, be it in the cloud or on-premise, completely frees the customer up from having to have that fear and trepidation about the ingest-based violations of their license, right? And so once again, what does that mean? It just means that those times that you were thinking about spending, sort of guarding the data or filtering the data or whatever the cycles were that you're going to spend on that, you can free yourself up from that and go chase a new outcome with Splunk, right? So I think of this one as being a really interesting scenario of, what's the potential, right? So in this case, I call it periodic use, but think of this as the what's the potential scenario. If I didn't have to constantly guard, right, and filter through all that data, right, and chase down people who are, chucking data into our Splunk and things along those lines, what's a new problem that I could be solving, right? So I share all of these with you because, while we're talking about, yes, a new licensing model and yes, some product features that enable it, I really just want to leave you at this point to kind of challenge you to think about where could you go with Splunk if you didn't have to be worried about these traditional issues that you've run into, all right? And like I said, hit any one of us up. You can hit me up to have a conversation about whether this might be applicable for you. We'd be happy to do it, and let's just see where it goes.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff, for all that valuable information and demo. Now we're going to start to wrap things up. Let's summarize the many high-level benefits of workload pricing. It frees you up to put all your data in one place to explore more use cases, aligns investments in hardware with software, is a familiar licensing model that is widely used in the industry, and is similar to your open source vendors, and provides you control over product expansion, more search versus indexing. In addition to enjoying the many unique benefits of workload pricing, you can still keep all the aspects you love about Splunk. This model is compatible across your portfolio, including our premium solutions, enterprise security, and ITSI. How it's licensed, which is based on entitlement still, remains the same, and you do still need to account for backup hardware for disaster recovery. But we still only account for search heads and indexers toward your entitlement, not heavy forwarders. So you have just heard about all the amazing benefits of workload pricing, and you might be wondering what next steps look like. First off, if you haven't already, break away from the scarcity mentality. Think about what you are not doing with Splunk that you want to or should be doing. Next, watch the best practices for infrastructure and workload pricing comp session if you're curious about more details on what to expect. Finally, reach out to your account team to look at your current and potential use cases to make sure workload pricing is a good fit for you. We're about ready to wrap up this Tech Talk, but before we do, I wanted to quickly share the pricing resources available to you to continue your journey. Check out the pricing FAQ if you have questions about any of our pricing options. Look at our pricing brochure to explore all of our models. And like mentioned, if you're curious on best practices, once you have workload pricing, be sure to watch the recording of this year's comp session. Also, check out some of our other Tech Talks, like Getting Data In and Search Basics. Finally, don't forget that we have an incredible community of Splunk users on our community site. You can search the answer section on any questions you have on pricing or getting data in. You can continue the conversation for this talk within the discussion section called Tech Talks, where you will also find the assets mentioned on the previous slide under the workload pricing discussion. And finally, there's Splunk Ideas, where you can submit new product enhancements or vote for current ideas from other customers. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to join us today. Please tune back in for future Tech Talks. We're so excited to share this series with you.